Hi everybody, this is Paul from Zozer Games, and today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about our flagship role-playing game, Hostile. It's currently in its second edition, and it comes as a pair of books, a setting book and a rules book. And as you can see, combining the two into a single book would have really created a giant brick made out of paper, so that was the reason for splitting into two books. Of the two books, the one I want to focus on really is the setting book. This encapsulates the world of Hostile, its history, planets, interstellar society, the corporations, the characters, stories, the types of antagonists and challenges. It's the heart of the Hostile game really, and can be used completely on its own to run a tabletop role-playing game, although you'll need a set of rules with it, either our companion rulebook or a copy of Cepheus Engine, which is in print, or a copy of Mongoose Traveller, which Cepheus Engine was based on. You'll find that they all play quite nicely with this setting book. So, Hostile, it's a science fiction role-playing setting. Well, so what? Why do you want to play another science fiction setting? What is Hostile? What has it got to offer, really? It's got the usual planets, starships, lasers, high technology. So there must be something that makes it a little bit different. And to answer that, really, I need to go back to 1982. That was the year I started role-playing, and it was the year that I discovered Traveller, classic Traveller, Mark Miller's Traveller. Here are my original 3 rulebooks, the classic Traveller rulebooks, and let's just take a look inside. There we go, and again there. So do you notice anything compared to modern role-playing games? There are no illustrations, and to tell you the truth, Mark's company at the time, a small startup, couldn't yet afford illustrations. But that meant that at that time you were encouraged, or you were forced to turn to your favourite science fiction movies or books for the inspiration for what things looked like and how they behaved and all those little details. They were there, you provided them, the referee provided those. And so that's what I did. It was 1982, and that period for me was awash with a new look, grungy, gritty style of science fiction. Ridley Scott produced Alien, there was O'Bannon's Outland, the Blade Runner, Silent Running, Escape from New York. O'Bannon was in Dark Star, so it was Dark Star. There were a few others as well, and of course Star Wars in '77 produced and really made a feature of the grungy, lived-in future that was copied endlessly after that. So when I refereed Traveller games in the 80s, and I was 13, 14, I decided that my settings, my Traveller setting, was going to look like these movies, the interiors, the costumes, the characters, all as they appeared in things like Dark Star and Silent Running and Alien. Our games could have been set in the universe of Alien or Blade Runner if you could have seen them as we were talking through them. And my game's themes began to resemble those of the movies, so we replaced the imperial nobility with mega corporations. Our ancient cultures, the ancient cultures on the planets that were thousands of years old, we replaced those with sort of more modern, newly colonized worlds. And a lot of the smaller starships from Traveller we replaced with big, huge freighters, which we built using the rules in the books. In 2017, all of this world building that I'd done back in the past all came flooding back. When I was discussing with the artist Ian Stead what the potential could be for creating a sort of alien-inspired Cepheus Engine game, Cepheus Engine setting book. And so together we decided to take all of those late 70s, early 80s science fiction movies as well as a few others from the later, sort of Total Recall, The Sphere, Event Horizon, later movies, but in the same style, the same sort of genre. And we're going to create a single comprehensive setting. And like my old early 80s setting, it was going to be a retro setting. It was going to emulate the technology that featured in those films, as well as the look, the atmosphere, and all the setting tropes as well. So we would write it as a setting book for Cepheus Engine, so you'd need those rules to play. And that's quite a neat open content clone of the original Traveller rules, so everything seemed to work quite well together. I'd already formulated the ideas, everything slotted together beautifully. I could pack the book, because I didn't need to write the rules were in Cepheus Engine. I could pack the book with as much setting information as I could. So for me, this was peak world building. I invented corporations, and then brand names, products, logos, near future history, how things came to be. I needed to create some interstellar laws, and that would fashion the customs and the society in space. I created in-game advertising once I'd built the corporations, colony worlds, unique colony worlds, starships, and these resembled, in my setting, more container ships and oil tankers. And then, of course, there's plenty of horror in there as well. Event Horizon, Alien. Lots and lots of space-orientated survival horror. And that was it right there, survival. This setting had to have a unique selling point, and that USP was going to be Hostile. It was both the game's new name and it's going to be its ethos. Everything is trying to kill you and your character. Yes, there are predatory alien killers. Yes, the vacuum will flash freeze you and boil your blood in seconds. But the planets themselves are hostile. Now, in Star Wars movies, Star Trek episodes, and loads of Traveller worlds, to be honest, the climate's usually Earth-like. The wildlife might be a bit quirky, a bit odd, but it generally follows Earth-like trends. Most places are habitable and pretty forgiving. Well, for this game, we're going to tip it on its head. The universe wasn't designed for humans. It was hostile. There are no garden worlds, and no vacation planets, and no tourists. If I look inside the setting book, page 12, we have an in-game message here. And paragraph 3, interstellar space. Interstellar travel itself was harsher and more uncompromising than anyone could have imagined. Where were all the Earth-like worlds we were supposed to colonize? Where were the alien races we were supposed to meet and communicate with? Where could humans actually stand and take a breath without wearing a goddamn spacesuit? Yes, there were worlds with atmospheres, and some of them didn't even kill you. But that's the real joke that the universe was playing on us. You see, you can't get everything at once. Temperature and climate, breathable atmosphere, a friendly biosphere. You can only choose two. So that's the basic ethos there. And it was it was a blue collar setting. That was another part of the deal of writing this game. The heroes are people who go out and work in this hostile universe. Alaska in space, so there are oil drillers, space truckers, colonists, there are grunts, there are marines, technicians. Characters come straight out of those extreme TV show documentaries that you find on Discovery and elsewhere. You know the ones, there's Mighty Ships, Deadliest Catch, Ice Road Truckers, that kind of thing. The adventure, the challenge is in the job. It's not some excuse to get you there and then there's some amazing wormhole that takes you to amazing planets and you see things you've never seen before. And all of this was diametrically opposed really to the type of science fiction I read when I was growing up. There the heroes were politicians, architects, mathematicians, noblemen, scientists, and of course astronomers. And I don't recall reading many, and there were some, but many, novels about the exploits of cobalt miners or zero-G construction workers or colonial farmers and their wives and families, or a space station crew's vending machine repair technician. These were a lot of science fiction today, and later in the 80s and the 90s did feature all these characters, but there's a sort of high science fiction of the 60s and the 50s. The kind of stuff I was reading in the 70s, it was more highbrow characters tackling problems from a higher level than the miner and the truck driver. So what do these blue-collar characters do? What kinds of adventures or missions will they go on? Well, because this is a corporate-dominated world, the character will form part of a crew that has a purpose and a job, working for one of these big conglomerates. The ones we have: Erebus, Matsuyama, Leland Okuda, Voronkovo, Reiner Gamma, Tharsis. So the players will create the characters together, so they'll have a mining crew, and it will need some drillers, a scientist, maybe a technician, a couple of general starship crewmen, and they'll all function together. They're not adventurers thrown together by fate in a starship tavern. They're out there already doing the job, working, and we pick up this crew during one of the missions, and then we follow the crew on their adventures. The adventures will be orientated towards the type of crew they are. So miners will spend the time in their asteroid fields. Space truckers will be hauling cargoes from one star system to another star system, and so on. And of course, none of these missions will be routine. Every mission will be tasking, challenging, difficult. There'll be things in there, unexpected things for them to overcome. Accidents, deep space horrors, deadly encounters, natural disasters. So they're the missions, and they're the scenarios, the adventures that will follow on. These crews all have one thing in common, though. They're all working, doesn't matter whether they're miners or starship crews or colonists, they're all working in very remote areas. They're all alone, they're isolated from help and rescue. And when things go bad, and of course they should go bad in every scenario, to be honest, the player characters have got to rely on their wits and their skills and their equipment to survive, because no one is coming to help them. This is Isolation, and if we look at page 210 of the setting book there's advice here for running the game with horror. And the first thing there, or the second thing there, is isolation. But that's only one of three main elements to running a science fiction horror game. The other one is uncertainty, not knowing the capabilities of what you're up against, not knowing how many or where. Everything's uncertain, you're in the dark, it's a new discovery. Unfortunately for you, no one knows anything else about it. And the third aspect of horror is timing, knowing when to throw a horror or scare at the players rather than bombard them with hundreds of the creatures to keep them off screen as well for a certain amount of time. So these three aspects, isolation, uncertainty and timing, are key to running a horror game. So a large part of the Hostile Setting book, the book itself, is filled with equipment. Now let's have a look. So we've got equipment here, and we've got weapons here, and vehicles as well. We've got vehicles, and a lot of these items are inspired by the retro movies the game is based on. I'd rather talk about those and how they were developed and created, because there's some interesting stories behind those, particularly the starships, in another video. Let me round out this exploration of the Hostile setting book then with a few words about the corporations. Having powerful and faceless, soulless corporations in a game is nothing new, really. There were mega corporations in the original Traveller back in the 70s and 80s. And I know it's become a bit of a stereotype, especially in all those awesome cyberpunk games of the 1990s that I played so much. But these evil corporations do feature in the retro movies, and they serve as protagonists just as much as background fluff. So remember the Tyrell Corporation from Blade Runner, creating androids for Work Off World. There was Con Amalgamated, the mining corporation from the movie Outland that supplied deadly drugs to its own workforce. And there was the Energy Corporation in Rollerball. That was one of a small number of corporations in that setting that ruled the entire world. Like everything in this setting, I wanted the corporations to seem believable, realistic, not kind of caricatured, unbelievable, that's something rooted in reality, that tied seamlessly into the rest of the setting rather than just be slapped on top there. So I did some research on the Keiretsu. These are the modern Japanese companies that exist in Japan today, that they replaced the old Zaibatsu from the pre-war period. And I also looked at the South Korean chaebol, I think you pronounce it like that, which are very similar structures in South Korea. Many of these corporations are actually conglomerates. They're related families of corporations that use each other's services. So the bank in the conglomerate finances the mining company in the conglomerate. This supplies ore to the steel business in the conglomerate, which sells it to the construction company in the conglomerate. And transport of the materials is done through the conglomerate's own shipping company. So these conglomerates, these chaebol, these keiretsu, have their own media outlets, their own drugs companies, their insurance firms, manufacturing companies, power companies, and so on. So they're a nested corporation, almost fully independent. And this is all based on real-world examples. And it just shows how a conglomerate, a corporation, can be a vast, autonomous, economic powerhouse, reliant on no one. Now, if you expand that globally into interstellar space, this is quite a frightening concept. I figured that if half a dozen of the world's biggest conglomerates got together, they could very easily leverage political power for themselves, since they form the infrastructure that the world depends on for survival. And this is the purpose of what I created as the United Corporate Combine. Essentially a global corporate government, a United Nations of the companies, or corporatocracy, government by corporations. So I figured this was the most realistic way that the setting might have a corporate government, to emulate the types of corporate domination that we see in Rollerball, Robocop, and of course the Alien movies. Is it realistic, though, this kind of structure? Well, these self-reliant corporate entities do exist today in Asia. And I don't really need to go into how current-day corporations are moving in that direction, because it's we see that everywhere. Finally, governments, nations, do they still exist in the hostile setting? Well, they do, but the model's based on, rather than large nation, a family of nations working together or meeting in the United Nations. Each one has votes and a share. Instead, in this corporate-dominated world, there are some powerful nations that have built a loose alliance around themselves of smaller nations. So we have the Community of American States, led by the United States. We've got the Asia-Pacific Partnership, led by Japan. And we have the Western European Union, led by Germany. these political unions simply narrow the focus a little bit. So in interstellar space, we have the American sector, the German sector, the Japanese sector, rather than dozens and dozens of national colonies spread out across the stars in the style of 2300 AD, the role-playing game. So, I think that about brings me to the end of the setting book. What's in it, why it exists, and how some of those decisions were made, and how we finally settled on the design and the aspects that you see in the book. Hopefully in the future I'll look at some of the equipment, the vehicles, the starships, and other aspects of the game as well. So I hope you found this video useful, and if you didn't, then, well, thanks anyway for watching through to the end. Okay, until next time, this is Paul from Zozer Games.